Alright, so shall we begin finally? After all that running and craziness? Alright, so A through period 2. So last time, most of you guys were here, except for you. We did all of period 1, right? We stopped right there. So we're going to try to do as much of period 2 today as possible. I don't know if we'll finish period 2, especially since we got a late start. But next week, I think it's going to be whatever we don't finish period 2, and then all of period 3. And we should be good for period 4 the following week. If depending on how things go, we can either finish up period 4 before break, or we'll just go one day over. But I think we have a good shot because period 4 doesn't take as long as period 3. So let's start at the beginning. Again, I obviously, ask as many questions as you want. Stop me anytime. If I'm going on too long about something, you can say, move it along, and let's get to the next topic. You guys run the show today. So concept 2.1. We have. Let's just look at what the main concepts, the big ones, are in this unit. So 2.1 is states and empires increase in size and contacts between regions are intensified. Human communities transform their religious and ideological beliefs and practices. So there's going to be a lot about religions in here today, which is one of my favorite topics, so we'll get a lot in there. Concept 2.2 is early states and empires grew in number, size, and population that frequently competed for resources and came into conflict with one another. So 2.2 is a lot of the political stuff, the empires growing and changing. 2.3 is the organization of large-scale empires. Trans-regional trade intensified, leading to the creation of extensive trade networks of commercial and cultural exchange. So that is the shorter one, and that's like just cultural fusion and Silk Road, stuff like that. So personally, I think 2.1, at least from what we've learned in class, I think that's the one we probably will need the most review on. Do you guys think that that's the case? What do you feel like you need more review on? Like religions and philosophies, empires, or trade routes? Yeah, so that's why I'm glad we're starting with that one, and I think we'll put the most of our time today into that one. But we'll do those ones as well. So the first one on here, Judaism. We talked about Judaism the other day in period 1. We talked about the roots of Judaism, the Hebrews, that the early state of the kingdom of Israel. But it's during period 2 that Judaism really develops as a religion. So last time we said it's not Judaism yet, right? It's Hebrew monotheism. Same way we said that the Vedic religion is not Hinduism yet, right? They're on their way to becoming that, but it's really the historical context that they go through certain processes and they develop into that religion. So with Judaism, right, you have these early texts or teachings that were passed down. They're finally written down into a final form or an official form with the Torah and the other Jewish writings that become the Hebrew Bible, right, which is more or less synonymous with the Old Testament or the Christian Bible. The order is a little bit different, and there's a few different books. It's not all written down at once, but the traditional narrative is that the Torah was delivered from God to Moses. Even if you take that narrative, it was something that wasn't physically written down until later, and most scholars of the religion say it was written down at a later point. But we see connections or similarities with some of the legal traditions from the region. So one really important thing to think about with early Judaism and the Jewish people, or the Israelites, however you want to refer to it, is their similarities with their neighbors, right? They are a Middle Eastern people, they're Near Eastern Mediterranean people, and there's going to be a lot of similarities with their neighbors. Their main difference is what? What's the one thing that sets the Jews or the Hebrews or the Israelites apart from their neighbors in the Eastern Mediterranean world?
They're monotheistic.
Exactly. That's the one thing, and that has played a huge role in their survival as a distinct ethnic group. I don't mean survival as in like life and death. I mean like as an identity. They have never been fully absorbed by another group and kind of lost that identity of being a distinct group. We often see this nowadays. For example, in the Middle East, there aren't like a lot of Assyrians anymore. You don't hear somebody who say, "Oh, I'm an Assyrian," right? Or I'm a Babylonian or something, right? They're usually just today, though, people who are the descendants of those ancient civilizations usually see themselves as Arabs, right, from the Middle East, Iraqis, But Christian communities in those countries still see themselves, they call them, there's an Syrian Christian church, Syriac church. In Egypt, the Coptic church, right, retains a descendant of the Egyptian language, right, even though Arabic has become the dominant language and Egyptians today tend to see themselves as Arab. So I bring that up to say that religious identity that's distinct from the people around you can be a means by which you preserve your cultural identity because they're connected to each other. So the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews have kind of maintained a identity throughout history, but they did have commonalities with their neighbors. I put up the Code of Hammurabi here because very often when people oversimplify Code of Hammurabi, what's the saying they associate with Code of Hammurabi?
Eye for an eye.
Eye for an eye. But eye for an eye is from where? It's not Code of Hammurabi. Take a guess. What are we talking about? The actual phrase, an eye for an eye, a life for a life.
The Torah?
Yeah, it's from the Torah. And that, it's a connection or association that is similar kind of law code or rulings on the big things, murder and theft, things like that. But actually, one of the big differences is Hammurabi's code is not really an eye for an eye, right? We said yesterday, based on different social classes, people are receiving different punishment. In the laws in the Torah, you didn't see that division necessarily based on social class. It was more egalitarian, it was more equal. But they do have connections with their neighbors, their language, their alphabet. The early Hebrew alphabet was really the Phoenician alphabet, essentially. And their language is very similar to those of their neighbors. So it says the Assyrians and Babylonians and Romans conquered the Jews at various states in history. So we were saying the other day, right, the kingdom of Israel, the north was conquered by the Assyrians, the south was conquered by the Babylonians, and they destroyed the important building in Jerusalem, the Jewish temple, yeah. So they destroyed the temple. It was, however, after the Persians took over, so that would be the first, when we get to 2.2, that's the first big empire of this period, right? 600 to 600, period 2. The first empire is the Persians. Anyone remember which Persians they are? Remember the name, something Persian, starts with an A? No, not Sasanian or Sassanid. That's the last pre-Islamic Persian dynasty or empire. Starts with an A. It's a throwback. Achaemenid. The Achaemenid Persians, that rings a bell, right? So the Achaemenid Persians were the first major empire of this period. The last is, we could say, the Byzantine Empire. They're kind of right on the borderline of period 2 and period 3, right? Even though most of their history is in period 3, they start out in period 2 with the fall of Rome. So from the beginning of the Byzantine Empire all the way back to the Persians, that's this period in terms of political terms. But the Persians do conquer the entire region of the Middle East, right? And they take over all these areas as well, kick out the Assyrians, kick out the Neo-Babylonians, and they'll, under their famous ruler of the Achaemenid Persians, all about religious tolerance, he allowed the Jews to go back to their homeland. It's like a tip of your tongue, right? I said, en la punta de la lengua, is that right? En la punta de la lengua? Está en la punta de la lengua. Cyrus the Great. So Cyrus let them go back and rebuild their temple, which would one day eventually be destroyed by the
Romans.
Yes, the Romans. I was waiting because I didn't have a slide for Cyrus on this. But the Romans, of course, this is the second temple, or a model of what it would look like. It was destroyed by the Romans about 40 years after the time of Jesus. And he's kind of caught up in all of that, in the middle of that conflict, right? That tension, political tension. But because of the destruction of the temple, Judaism has to evolve, it has to adapt. They don't have this central place. Like in the Muslim world, what's the central location? So the building is Kaaba, yeah. In what city? Mecca, right? And Muslims perform the Hajj pilgrimage, right, to go there. Jews used to also perform a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and visit the temple, but the temple's not there anymore. So, right, if there was no more Kaaba, Islam would have to adapt and change, figure out how do we now function as a religion without the central thing. Judaism did as well, so it went through more and more changes. You also have, I think we're going to talk about it a little bit lower, but the spreading out of the Jewish people throughout the region. Oh yeah, it's in here. So these conquests contributed to the growth of Jewish diasporic communities around the Mediterranean and the Middle East. So diasporic meaning that they spread out into different places. This is the proof that the Romans, showing you that the Romans conquered, took over the temple, and then actually used that wealth to build the Colosseum. You remember that from last year. But the Jews spread out from Judea, right? This is not starting with the Roman conquest, but from early on, right? Jews have been migrating, have been settling in different places throughout the Mediterranean world, and also into Persia as well. But especially with the Roman attack on the Jews, this war with the Jews in Judea, there's going to be more and more Jews spreading to Spain, to France, North Africa, very heavily, the Middle East. Egypt was a big center of Judaism, especially in Alexandria, these cosmopolitan centers, Constantinople. So there's this diasporic community of Jews throughout the world, and when we talk about, Jewish minorities experiencing a lot of challenges in the Middle Ages in Europe, right? Back to these communities that have migrated over time to those regions. Okay, Sanskrit scriptures, right? The Sanskrit scriptures, what is the main original one, the first texts of the Indian religions?
The Vedas?
The Vedas, right? So it starts with the Vedas. There will be other texts as well, but all of them, or the early ones, at least the Vedas, are written in Sanskrit, which is this early Indian language. So it's going to develop into Hinduism. Now, this is a good word here. It says it's a monistic belief system. Do you even know what monistic means? Sounds like what? Monotheistic. What does monotheistic mean?
One God. So doesn't it mean like one central God and then other smaller gods?
That's not what it means. That's a really good thought, because that does describe Hinduism pretty well. But it's another element of Hinduism. I think it's largely accurate to describe Hinduism, though Hinduism is so diverse, it's kind of hard to put one term on it. If monotheistic means one God, you took out what to say monistic?
One.
Mono is one.
Theistic.
So theos means what? Monotheist means that?
God.
God, right? So you took out God. So now we just have
One.
So what could monistic mean?
One.
One, yeah. It means everything is one. So the idea being that, and many forms of Hinduism have this mentality or this perception that everything is one. Like, it's not just that there's, the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, right? They have a separation between God and creation, right? There's God, and then there's everything else. Hinduism and all other dharmic religions have a monistic conception of reality, that everything is one, including God. So creation and creator are, the distance between them is just an illusion, and everything in existence is just kind of like a manifestation of God, or whatever word if you don't use the word God, maybe that's too Western, but that's the idea, right? This power. It's all one. The universe, right? As some people would say, kind of a New Age thing, but similar idea. So again, that there's diversity in that belief, but that would allow you to have one God above everything, multiple gods that are manifestations of that, and then even people and everything else could be, according to some Hindu traditions, a manifestation of that. Although that's generalizing, because there are dualistic and monistic forms of Hinduism. So you do have other gods, devas. That's in early, even from the early times they have different gods. But what's going to start happening in this period and period 2 is kind of a reform and a further development of the teachings. And this is where we get a lot of the things that we're familiar with when we think of Hindu philosophy and beliefs. We know there's many gods, but beyond that, what are the things you think of when you think of Hinduism in terms of its beliefs? Guys, what do you think of for Hinduism?
Caste system. And then
Okay,
that,
well,
like,
so that's more like the practices, but like what they believe about like life and death and
reincarnation.
So we often think about reincarnation, more accurately rebirth, this concept of, after you die, you're reborn to another body, right? So these kind of ideas are going to come in later on. They're going to come in during this period as other teachings that are existed in India already are blending with the Vedic tradition, and you have new Sanskrit texts like the Upanishads coming in, and I think I have a better slide. Here we go. There. So you have this new belief. I don't think you probably need to know this for the AP exam. It's called Brahmanism. Basically, this idea of Brahman, right? That's what you were kind of alluding to. This idea that there is one God or one force or one creator or one universal entity that is above everything, and all gods and all everything is a manifestation of that. And so, like I said, some belief was that all souls and all creation was part of God. Others would say that all of the gods perhaps are a manifestation of this one Brahman, but everything else is the creation. So the key thing to know here is that even above all the gods, there is the concept of one something, one God, one being that's supreme over everything, supreme power of the universe. And then along with that belief, you have these new traditions that become part of Hinduism, reincarnation, right? And then along with that are these other three, karma and dharma, which are how you're going to be able to have a positive experience through reincarnation or achieve your goal. So the goal of reincarnation is not to be reborn in a better life, right? That's a common misconception. It's not I want to be reborn to have the best life ever, lots of luxuries. What is the real goal? This is good. We're glad we're here, right?
To become part of the universal soul.
Yes, exactly. So to essentially be released from this cycle of rebirth, right? We see this come across really strongly in Buddhism as well, which we'll talk about as well today. But even in this early period, this developing what's going to become Hinduism, you have this idea of moksha, right? Release, liberation from the cycle of rebirth. The cycle of rebirth is something that we're trying to get out of. We're trying to escape and trying to be done, right? In the Abrahamic tradition, you have to think of heaven, right? You want to get to heaven, but when you die, you hope that in one lifetime you've done enough to, by whatever means, obviously different religions have different beliefs, but you hope that you've done enough to achieve that. In Hinduism and the Dharmic religion, it's more of when you play the game, if you lose, game over, start again, right? You lose, game over, start again. If you completely beat the game, you don't play again. You're done, you won, right? So you're done with the game. That's the idea. You're done with life. You've beat it. You've succeeded. You've got a perfect score, and now you're good. Finished. You don't have to keep replaying. That's moksha. So to attain moksha, you have a combination of karma and dharma. Karma is like your good and bad deeds. So being a good person, right? Dharma is your responsibilities, your duties, and that can be your social responsibilities, and it can be your religious responsibilities. But this is key here to distinguish Hinduism from Buddhism and Jainism, because what does Hinduism have that Buddhism and Jainism reject? We were just talking about today, actually, when we were doing the questions.
The caste system.
The caste system, right? So for Hinduism, what's developing into Hinduism, a really important part of your dharma is fulfilling your caste responsibilities. It's seen as your socio-religious duty, right? I am a kshatriya, I am a warrior, I have to go be the best warrior I can be. If I decide I want to go be a priest, and I devote my life to being a priest, I have completely rejected and ignored my dharma, right? You have to go with what you're given. Do your best at that. Obviously, Buddhism and Jainism will reject that and still believe you have other religious duties, and that's what dharma means for them. Ahimsa is nonviolence, which we see as a common feature in a lot of these religions as well. So that's why we said on here that contribute to the development of the social and political roles of the caste system, right? That it's kind of giving a religious legitimacy to this social system, and kind of reinforcing it through these beliefs. I'm not going to talk. Oh, we have Buddhism here in the next one, right? So new belief systems and cultural traditions emerged and spread, often asserting universal truths. So I won't talk too much about Jainism. Jainism and Buddhism are very similar. Buddhism is the more popular one. It's not as extreme. It's not as extreme, has a very negative connotation. It doesn't ask as much from its followers. It has a more toned down version of the same philosophy, which is give up everything, give up your desires. So Jainism was very much in terms of self-denial, give up everything you need or you want, really, to the extent that in some forms of Jainism, you have people who are very devoted, who are monks, who don't wear clothes because you want to show I am willing to give up anything and everything, right? Jainism, for that reason, right, had a hard time winning converts because it asked so much of its followers, although it's still a pretty sizable religion in certain parts of India. But Buddhism, see, Buddhism basically suggested what they call the middle way, right? We don't want to go too deep into this self-denial, but it is an important thing. We have to find out a way how to moderate it, how to find that right balance in doing it without going too far. And so he has the Four Noble Truths, right? The idea that everything in life is suffering, all life is suffering, and the reason we have all this suffering is because of our desires, the wanting of the things that are not really important, right? So there's kind of like an anti-materialism to Buddhism. To think about, I notice a lot of students have a hard time kind of wrapping their heads around Buddhism if they don't come from that tradition. But there are strains of a similar concept in the Abrahamic religions, Christianity and Islam, of kind of separating yourself from the worldly things, right? We see it in Christian monasticism for sure. Like, I'm going to give up, the luxuries of life, the things I don't absolutely need, because I want to show like my connection is more something beyond this life, beyond the material world. And so Buddhism definitely, has a similar idea that all these attachments we have to the world are the things that are like chaining us. And the only way to free ourselves from that is to stop needing them, to stop wanting them, to recognize that they're not actually as valuable or as full of worth as we think they are, as we tend to perceive. So if we are able to break free from our desires, then we won't have any of that suffering, we won't have any of that sorrow and pain. And so how can you get yourself to that point? How can I, bring myself to accept and really practice where I don't feel attached to things? He says it's following the Eightfold Path, which is essentially, leading the good life and following good virtues, a virtuous life, and you'll be able to reject desires and see the bigger picture, really, right? So for Buddhism as well, there's a concept of samsara, of reincarnation, but it's not attached to the caste system. Same with Jainism, there's no concept of caste system. So you don't have that social stratification reinforced by the religion, which is why it's going to be very attractive to lower classes in society, as we said in class earlier. And the moksha, or in Buddhism's case, nirvana, is that release from rebirth. Depending on the tradition, whether it's Hinduism, Jainism, or Buddhism, and even within those traditions, you have different explanations or descriptions of what that means to be released from the cycle of rebirth. In Buddhism, it might just be nothingness. You're gone, you're done, it's over, you don't have to worry about anything anymore. Later forms of Buddhism, like Mahayana Buddhism, that really spread in China, made it a little more fun, a little more interesting. You go into this heaven, hang out with all these other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and stuff, and saints, and chill with them. Hinduism as well, different ideas about what the afterlife looks like, but like what you said was really a good way of putting it. You can become one with the universe, or one with Brahman, or one with Atman, the universal soul, depending on the philosophy you take. But the idea of becoming one with everything, so it's very often less like, oh, you're going to float on a cloud, and you're going to just like have like a unlimited buffet forever. It's a little less tangible, a little more philosophical, metaphysical, but that same idea of like, everything's good now, you don't have to worry anymore. Confucianism, we have monks, people who devoted their lives to this idea. And so we call these the Dharmic religions because all three, Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, have this concept of Dharma that unites them, so we kind of group them together by that. Confucianism and Taoism, so we have those two here. They have some similarities, they have some differences, and they're both very popular in China throughout Chinese history. They definitely conflict on certain things, but not so much that they can't exist together. And so very often we see a syncretism between Confucianist and Taoist or Taoist ideas. I was thinking about this today, and I wouldn't say this is like an official terminology or anything, but I think a nice way to kind of conceptualize what their goals are is Confucianism is looking for order, and Taoism is looking for balance. Right? So those might seem like similar things. Yeah. But what does order look like? Or what do you need to do to achieve order? Like in anything, on your desk, or what do you need to do to order in your body, or order in your classroom?
Categorize things?
Categorize things, perhaps. Rank things, maybe. Right. You have to put them in place properly. So it's not like legalism where we're talking about strict laws, but Confucianism wants order in society, and so there's an emphasis on kind of following not necessarily the rules, but following the norms of society. So respect is very important. We know this concept of filial piety, right? Filial piety. Essentially, respect for your elders, respect for your superiors. I actually had some pictures of it, but maybe I can. There we go. No, I think it comes up again later, perhaps, filial piety, because I know I put some images for it. Oh yeah, it comes up again later. But also talk about it now, because we're talking about with Taoism. So it's all about filial piety, having respect for your elders, making sure the government is run well, keeping society structured, keeping it functioning properly, so there's not disorder, so there's not chaos, right? We want to keep everything running smoothly. Taoism is more about finding a balance. There's always going to be chaos. There's always going to be order. We want to find the balance. When you want to achieve balance, you don't do as much. You know what I mean? When you want to order something, you have to go and order it. To achieve balance, you have to kind of like stay still. You have to calm. You have to. So when you think of Taoism, the word balance can come in. The yin and the yang symbol, which is not exclusive to Taoism, but it's very much associated with Taoism, plays a big role. So balance with nature, balance with everything in existence. So Taoism is a lot more philosophical. It's a lot more esoteric. Confucianism is much more like, let's deal with actual things, like people, to order things directly, to take direct action. Taoism is more like, look, man, if you just find that balance inside yourself, everything will just work out. So it's more like indirect. I think I might even say that on here. So it says, in major Taoist writings, the core belief of balance between humans and nature assumed that Chinese political system would be altered indirectly. So that's basically what it means, right? If we just find that balance in ourselves, you got to find the way. You got to find the Tao, right? That's what Tao means, the way. What way? The way, You just know, man. Right? It's a little more, right, philosophical. It's in the same way that Stramana traditions, those traditions that came into the Vedic religion are a little bit more out there, a little more philosophical, a little bit more like, whoa, just like think about it, right? It's like, blow your mind. Because it's more personal as well, right? Confucianism is much more societal, right? How can we all need to get on board with this, everybody, versus Taoism is like, just do it yourself and find that inside yourself. But you can see how they might have conflict with each other, but also that they can be used together, right? Taoism could be more of a personal thing, a more more individual thing, and then on a societal scale, right? Confucianism can be applied. I'm not going to get into the medical stuff. I think we can skip past that. Oh, I skipped something here for A, right? In new belief systems, we didn't mention Ashoka. So there's the idea that Ashoka was the emperor of the Mauryan dynasty, the most important emperor of the Mauryan dynasty, and he converted to Buddhism. I think you guys remember that comic, right, from last year that one of my students made, where he, because of his actions in war, he regretted the violence that he caused, and he converted to Buddhism, and he had the what's of Ashoka?
Edicts.
Yeah, the edicts or edicts of Ashoka, and promoted Buddhism in that. So he's mentioned the Dhamma, which is another pronunciation of Dharma. This is what we should follow, and trying to encourage good actions on the part of his people in his empire, his subjects, and so that helps to spread Buddhism as well. Christianity. I put this in here just to remind us that Confucianism influenced the Han Dynasty especially, and of course we'll go on to influence Chinese dynasties for throughout history, really up until the 1900s. Pretty consistently, Confucianism is a major force in Chinese government because it's a philosophy based around ordering society, and that's kind of the main job of governments, right? Christianity. There's a new History Channel show about Jesus. Haven't seen it yet. Looks interesting, but I grabbed the shot from it. Hopefully I don't get hit with copyright. Can't copyright Jesus, man. So Jesus of Nazareth, real name Joshua. I think it's interesting to think of him as Joshua. Makes him seem more approachable, regular guy. So Joshua Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth. So one thing is the Jewish connection, right? We understand Jesus was a Jewish teacher. They called him rabbi, although the concept of what a rabbi is was not as formal back then, but essentially teacher. A lot of times in the Bible where you see Jesus being referred to as Lord, they are making a very deliberate translation of rabbi. It could also be translated as teacher, perhaps more accurately. But he really reinforced the Jewish teachings. But because, I don't think it mentions Paul in here, but it really ought to. Christianity as it developed, right, it's drawing on Judaism, but it also brings in Roman and Hellenistic Greek influences because those philosophies were around. They were even in the Jewish community. The Hellenistic influences, the Greek influences in the East since that time of Alexander the Great. And Paul plays an instrumental role in the spread of Christianity because he never met Jesus, but he was an early follower of his ideas, although he originally was opposed to them. And the big thing that Paul does is he goes into the Roman Empire. He was a Roman citizen, and he preaches the message of, or at least his interpretation of the message of Jesus, and he decouples it from Judaism. You don't have to be Jewish to be a follower of Jesus anymore, right? The original disciples were all Jews. They were circumcised men.